Greetings, 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 greetings. It is I, your king, King Clifford Jefferson, a Senator Godfrey the Fifth Caravan Jew, son of folk, ruler of Jerusalem. I am the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, which we know as Jesus Christ, better known as the King of Peace. It is November the 17th, 2023, which is the birth year 2973. It is if I'm not mistaken, it's a Thursday. Friday. Okay, Friday, Holy Day. I'm glad to be here today uh, with another marvelous lecture. Those who watched the past two lectures, Martin versus Waddell, the lecture on that, as well as the English Church of England versus the Christian Church of England. There's a lot of information in that, so I suggest that you take your time and digest that video. It's going to actually complement you on this video, because this video or this lecture is going to be a microscopic look at your actual government, all right, i.e. your present government, the government which you call the United States of America government, as conferred upon it through the Articles of Confederation, which you now know as the United States of America, which was a styled name or current name. So this is going to be a very exciting lecture. Once again, I'm amazed at the amount of information that I'm able to obtain in such a short time by way of visualization. As heavy as the burden that wears the crown. Uh, you know, that couldn't have been the truest saying. And truly overstanding that is the purpose and intent of why it's termed the burden or a burden. So I can best explain that by my diligence to continue on in that capacity as the king or officer of the public and holder of the public trust. All estates are intel, all right, through the king's what we call radical title under his regalia, which is nothing more than his prerogative power, all right, or his prerogative right. We're going to speak about these terms today. This is going to be a very, very good lesson for you. All right. All citizens must pay close attention, must pay close attention for what's being said by your king. All right. Your true leader. All right. The true representation of the people. All right. The House of Representatives and the Senate, it's not what you think they are. Okay. All right. So this video is really gonna cut the head off the beast, cut the head off the beast, and you gotta ask yourself, America is not based off genealogy and ethnicity. It's based off their their characteristics, which is under in Ray versus Han San, deals with the Naturalization Act with confer citizenship as what they call an American citizen based off the color of their skin, which they term free white person. Okay, so once again, I'm trying to be as clear as possible so that no rock is not unturned. Crossing all T's, dotting all I's. I'm taking every step that's needed to make you fully uh, conscious of the existence of things that you claim uh, don't exist. All right, and just run it right in front of you. All right, so this is not no secret. This is not no hoax. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's the straight truth. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Once again, we appreciate your homage, your free and common focus for those who are able to donate, those who have, and those who are able, those who are willing to do so. You can do so by contributing to $ Clifford Jefferson L or the English Temple Church of England. But we know with great power comes great responsibility. And, I know who are the faithful and those who wait on the true calling of one who concerned himself to be the master. all right, or the master teacher, all right. So, this is the master teaching that you're getting right now, all right. I don't think it's ever been done before. I don't think it can be done on this level that I'm giving it to you. So with that, let's get started. Try not to hold you long. Americans are citizens and nationals of the United States of America. The United States is home to people of many racial and ethnic origin. Consequently, American culture and law do not equate nationality with race or ethnicity, but with citizenship and an oath of permanent allegiance. I repeat, Americans, no matter who you are, no matter what nationality you come from, what race you come from, or what ethnicity or genealogy or genetics that you say you compose of, it does not matter here in America. All right, based off their interpretation of what citizen means, based off their standard. All right, that fits their requirement. Americans are the citizens and nationals of the United States. But they just said the United States is home to people of many racial and ethnic origins, i.e., nationality. Consequently, American culture and law do not equate nationality with race or ethnicity, but with citizenship and an oath of permanent allegiance to that citizenship that does not include your race, your nationality, or nationality or your ethnicity. Cut and dry. Okay, we can move forward. The Constitution of the United States was preceded by the Articles of Confederation, which is one of the constitutions for the United States, as colonies, as sovereign states. The only power that they surrendered the to the central government was that of the power that they recognized as colonies that belonged to the king and parliament. All right, to king and parliament, i.e., king and king and parliament operated in what they call royal prerogatives, all right, or the prerogative rights of the king and his relationship with the legislature, all right? Not talking about the king's council or the king's bench. We're talking about the king's parts of. We ain't talking about the king's bench, all right? We're talking about the king's legislative council, i.e., king and parliament. Very important. We're going to travel back in time. A lot of times we have a hard time grasping things that are out of mind. So, Article 6 of your present Constitution of the United States, which was modeled after New Jersey's 1844 Constitution, as established in Billings versus Harris, which actually particularly says the same, that they will continue the common law of England, all right, as Sampson Smith versus Alabama. We have visited that as well, which is case law created by the depositors of law and the time and era of the colonies, all right? Not considering that which exists before the colonies, which was those cases as designated in depositories by those who consisted on the king's bench, all right? Which consists of what we call the courts of common pleas, the courts of chancery, i.e. courts of equity, and courts of exchequer, all right? So let's continue. Article 6 of the United States Constitution establishes the laws and treaties of the United States made in accordance with it as the supreme law of the land, which forbids a religious test as a requirement for holding a government position and holds the United States under the Constitution responsible for debts incurred by the United States under the Articles of Confederation. Valid proof. All debts, contracts, engagements entered into before the adoption of the Constitution, which you go by now, which includes Article 6 that we're reading from, shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution, which we're reading from, as under the Confederation, which are the articles which were created back in 1781. This Constitution and laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary is notwithstanding. So there's your states. Prior to that, they were called colonies. All right. Under the new ratification of the Constitution of 1789. All right. Which embodies the spirit of the Articles of Confederation as established in Article 6, because everything that was created under Article of Confederation is bound in Article 6 of the United States Constitution, which we're reading from now. So not just the judges are bound by that, but Congress. All right? The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislators, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, should be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So this is a separation of powers under Article 6. The legislative, which is the Legislative Council, the Executive Department, which is your government that consists of many departments, such as the United States Department of State, your House of Representatives, the Department of the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the President. This is under Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Article 1 Constitution consists of the legislator. Okay, Article 1 deals with the legislature, Article 2 deals with the executive branch, and Article 3 deals with the judiciary. All right, which are separate branches of government, which no member can act in any other branch other than the one that they are participating in, or hold office or hold their tenure. The senators and representatives, both before mentioned, the members of the several states legislators, i.e. state governments, in all 13 states of the 13 colonies, which were now called the United States, and all those now which were states included in the Union, all right, are bound by that perpetual union that's encumbered here in Article 6 of the United States Constitution, all right? And all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and the several states, to be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Okay, so this is Article 6 of the United States Constitution and the spirit of the Articles of Confederation in regards to the debt that was created back then, and that being the supreme law of the land, and including all treaties made. That includes the judges, the executive department, the judges, which is the judiciary, the executive department, which is your president, vice president, secretary of state, your house speakers, and then your legislators, which is the senators and your representatives. All right. These are what you call checks and balances. All right. Checks and balances. Everybody follow along. This is the master teacher at work. I just don't talk. I show you. I put it right in front of you. The only thing you can do is turn your head or change the channel. The Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union was an agreement among the 13 states of the United States, formerly the 13 colonies, that serves as the nation's first frame of government. It was debated by the Second Continental Congress at Independence Hall in Philadelphia between July 1776 and November 1777, and finalized by the Congress of November 15, 1777. It came into force on March 1st, 1781. After being ratified by all 13 states, a guideline principle of the Articles was established in preservation of the independence of the sovereignty of the states. Okay? The continued independence of the sovereignty of the states. Everybody grasp that. The Articles consciously established a weak central government. It was a central government composed of all the 13 colonies, now called states, now admitting other states into the Union as a perpetual union. This is what they call their central government, all right? Which is the executive, legislative, executive, judicial branch established as a separation of power, all right? And it was weak, affording it only those powers the former colonies had recognized as belonging to king and parliament. Once again, the powers that the colonies surrendered to the central government, now called the United States, part of that called the Articles of Confederation, being that there was a constitution, so only the power that they had was the power surrendered by the colonies that the colonies recognized as belonging to king and parliament. All right? King and parliament. Y'all need to wrap your head around what's being said. Under the Articles of Confederation, the colonies surrendered their powers that belonged to the king and parliament, i.e., called royal prerogatives, to the central government under George Washington and the founding fathers who made up the cabinets that what you call now Congress. All right, what you call now Congress. All right, Congress was established at the head of the auspices of the voices of the executive branch. Once again, your Congress was established from the voices of the executive branches, consists of the powers that were established under the Articles of Confederation, conferring those powers to the executive. The United States Constitution. All right? That's the problem with that. I'm going to show you why. Because the powers that they surrendered to the central government, which is a weak government, because at that time they were subject to the stronger government, which was the parliament and the king. Parliament and the king. So it shows the Articles of Confederation that the powers that the United States now have is the power surrendered from the colonies to the Article the United States of America, the power that belonged to the king and parliament. All right. At that time, that was a fusion of power under the crown that was here in what we call the province of New Jersey here in Perth Amboy in 1776. Under the provinces of New Jersey, all right, under the royal prerogatives of the crown. Prior to the creation of what? The New Jersey legislation. All right. All states had their own legislation. All right. Their own legislative council, just like you got the United States Legislative Council, which is based off what we call the Senate and the House of Representatives. In England, they were called the House of Lords and the House of Commons. You're being taught. And king and parliament are during the reign of a female monarch. We know that in 1702, it was at the hands of a queen monarch in parliament, which was called the crown in New Jersey. All right, Queen Anne, 1702. We're going to get case laws to validate that. All right, under the royal prerogatives of the crown. We're going to have a 19th century case validate that. The king in parliament, sometimes referred neutrally as crown in parliament, is a technical term of constitutional law in the Commonwealth realms that refer to the crown. We all know what the crown is. The crown is the corporation soul, consists of a natural person. And the legislative role, acting with the advice and consent of parliament, including if the parliament is bicameral, both lower house and upper house. Bills passed by the houses are sent to the sovereign or governor, general, lieutenant governor, or governor as his representative. By royal assent, they ain't say nothing about no president, which once granted makes the bill into law. This is called slip law. All right. These primary acts as legislation are known as acts of parliament. In the United States, they're called statutes at large or codes of law. All right. Once again, statutes of law or codes of law. An act may also provide for secondary legislation, which can be made by the crown subject to the simple approval of a lack of disapproval of parliament. So we're talking about king and parliament. All right. We're not talking about the United States. We talk about king and parliament, which we've seen in the Articles of Confederation that they surrendered to the United States. So the cabinets that they have are called the cabinets are actually parliament because they work off what they call house rules. All right, house rules, there's another terminology for it, or parliamentary procedures. All right, they're called parliamentary procedures. In king and parliament, the concept of crown as part of parliament is related to the idea of a fusion of power, meaning that the executive branch and the legislative branch of government are fused together. The executive branch and legislative branch are fused together under what we call king and parliament. But in the United States, there's a separation of powers. So there is no fusion of power. All branches remain separate. All right? They remain separate. This is a key concept of the Westminster system of government, developed in England and used across the Commonwealth and beyond. It is in contradiction to the idea of the separation of power. Did you hear that? It is contradiction to the idea of the separation of power. So it says the fusion of power, which we know was in New Jersey under the crown, under Queen Anne, or Queen in Parliament, which got their authority under the authority of which originated from as King in Parliament. All right? King in Parliament, because in present day, they're going to make reference to the king, which the sources I'm going to show you today in correspondence to what we're reading. All right? So we understand in our forefathers' government, the fusion of power was a fusion of the executive branch and the legislative branch, known in their day as king in parliament or queen in parliament. In this day and time, there's a separation of power, which means that the legislative and the executive branch, which is uh, which is the legislator and the executor of the legislative branches, are separate. All right, which is separate from the judiciary, which is called the judicial branch. All right. We understand in England, the judicial branch is governed by the King's Bench, headed by his chancellor. And then the government, under the executive legislative power fusion of government, is headed by what we call the House of Lords and the House of Commons. All right? Let's move forward. Y'all catch on quick. So since we're talking about the legislative branch, which is the former, not the latter, because the legislation can only be executed by that which creates the legislation, which is called the legislative council. All right, they're called the legislative council. We know king and parliament. We understand where that comes from. We know parliament uh, comes from in England from the English parliament, and we know there were separate parliaments: the Scottish parliament, the Irish Parliament, United Kingdom Parliament, which you see going on today, has nothing to do with the English Parliament. The English Parliament is just right here today. Right here today, the United States, and present day, what you call the United States, that Parliament and the King is represented in this government. This is the King's government as well as the King's judiciary. All right, I'm going to prove it. All right, so we no longer make reference to outside of the evidence that I'm going to bring forth, make mention to king in parliament, because we know that that was surrendered by the colonies, now called states, to the weak central government, which you call the United States of America, which still honors the government that existed prior to the obligation, debts, contract under the Articles of Confederation. All right, which involves the fusion of power that belong to king in parliament. All right, very, very, very important to understand that. Let's get some reference to that. Everybody pull that up. United States Fidelity Company versus Carter, 1933. Everybody pull that up. Not yet. Not yet. Let's not pull that up yet. Let's go here. I know I should have went in line. The Legislative Council. Let's go here. The Legislative Council. Let's go there. Everybody pull that up. Legislative Council. A legislative council is the legislator or one of the legislative chambers of a nation, colony, or a subnational division, such as a province or a state. It was commonly used to label unicamerals, unicameral, or upper house legislator bodies in the British former colonies. Do you understand that? So bicameral and unicameral means two separate, and unicameral means one. Unicameral versus or contrast to bicameral. All right. The upper house legislative bodies in the British former colonies. However, it has also been used as a designation in other non-Commonwealth nations. A member of the Legislative Council is commonly referred to as a MLC. All right. We're talking about under the monarchs, because the Commonwealth or overseas possessions or under the King's radical titles include the Commonwealths. All right. We know at the time of this nation, or the nation made up of the states as colonies, was made up of representations of what we call countries, which were all surrendered to the English crown. All right. So therefore, when you consider the United States, you must also consider the English crown in that same thought process as a result of the history that are which is joined in them. It says in the United States, a legislative council has a different connotation and means a council within a legislature which supervises nonpartisan support staff. You hear that word all the time, nonpartisan, when you see them making their deliberations or speeches or addresses. You hear that word, nonpartisan. So the difference between a legislative council and a council is the informality and formality of their structure. We see the legislative council is a legislative chamber made up exclusively of those who deal with the legislation. All right, exclusively. All right, in the Kingdom of England, which we know was a fusion of power, under the fusion of government. All right, a legislative council is a legislator or a legislative chamber of a nation, colony, or subnational division, such as a province or state. But in the United States, the legislative council has a different connotation. It means a council within a legislator which supervises nonpartisan support for a staff. Let's move forward. The history of legislative councils versus a council, because they have different procedures in those chambers for the councils. All right, the executive branch laws that govern them are different from those of the legislative branch unless they're diluted by mingling, all right, which is the case at hand. I'm going to prove it. History of the Legislative Council in the English Empire, because we know the British Empire was preceded by the English Empire, all right? And the British Empire, as they say, the authority under which legislative councils have been constituted has varied, some under what we call the royal prerogatives, all right? Others by acts of parliament. So the acts of parliament, the royal prerogatives are different, all right? The royal prerogatives denotes to the king's jury regalia, all right, contrast to that which made by parliament, and some by commissions and royal instructions, particularly unicamerals or the upper house, and a bicameral legislature, where traditionally many members were appointed by the governor rather than elected, were given the designation of what they call a legislative council. All right? But you see the distinction between the legislative council and the powers and authorities that arise from the legislative council, such that the distinction between those of a legislative council and the council, because the council is composed of those who are made up of what we call commissioners or commission, contrast to those made of parliament, which denotes to those deriving of the king and parliament, based off the king's royal prerogative. All right? You must understand that. royal prerogative? Was it the council? Right. A council is a group of people who come together to consult, deliberate, or make decisions. A council may function as a legislator, especially at a town, city, or county shire level. But most legislative bodies at the state, provincial, or national level are not considered councils. Now, they just said that the United States is not considered a legislative council, but a council. But it just said here on the national or state, provincial level, they're not considered council. So, what the heck is going on? How could the United States be considered a council when they just said that councils are not the same as the legislative council that exists on the state, provincial, or national level? It's right there. Right there. Can't make this up. As such, at such levels, or itself, at such levels, there may be no separate executive. At such levels, there may be no separate executive branch, and the council may effectively represent the entire government. You hear that? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I wish I had that sound making bomb. So the United States government is not officially a legislative council. It's just a council, right? That's ran by the executive branch that represents the entire government. My screen freeze. Hold on. My screen froze. We're having technical difficulties. Hold on for a minute. What's going on? Bear with me. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, y'all. Let me get back to it. So as we can see, the legislator uh, council is different from that of a council who acts as the legislator, uh, as defined here. And on such a level, there will be no separate executive branch, and the council may effectively represent the entire government. All right. So we know that the separation of power in the United States, as we've seen in the Legislative Council, because on that level, uh, they're only a council. They're only a council right here. In the United States, the Legislative Council has different connotation and means a council within a legislature which supervises nonpartisan support staff, contrast to that of a legislative council, which is based off world prerogatives. All right, which is based off world prerogatives, because we know that the legislator makes law. Okay, the legislator makes law. All right. For those who aren't familiar with it, let me just post it up real quick. The legislature is an assembly with the authority to make laws for political entities such as a county, nation, or city. They are often contrast with the executive and judicial powers of branch. So this is the United States or your state, whichever one you're talking about, contrast to that which is acts on a fusion of power, such as king and parliament. All right. But we know on the United States level, which is based off the union, because it said the states maintain their sovereignty. All right, outside of that which was surrendered, which but rightfully belonged to king and parliament. So there is no king and parliament, then that means that it could not be a true legislative council sitting in the government as a result of the limited powers that they have, as stated as acting on the council. All right, which runs the whole government. Because I'm going to prove that your Senate and your House of Representatives are ran by your the executive department. They're ran by it. All right, let's get to it. Prerogative, world prerogative. It's different to the world prerogatives. It's a prerogative that belongs to king and parliament. All right, king and parliament. Let's read. The royal prerogatives is a body, customary authority, privilege, and immunities recognized in common law and sometimes in civil law jurisdictions possessing a monarchy as belonging to the sovereign and which have become widely vested in the government. It is the means by which some of the executive power of government possessed by a vested by invested in a monarch with regard to the parts of the government of state are carried out. Right here. In Britain, prerogative powers were originally exercised by the monarch acting without any observed requirement for Parliament's consent. After its empowerment in certain matters following the Magna Carta, since the ascension of the House of Handovers is the uh, house starts with King George the First. All right, King George the First, King George the Second, King George the Third. That's the House of Hanover because the House of Stuart is from King James the First to King Queen Anne. All right. It says, since the inception of the House of Hanover, these powers has been, with minor exception, in economically unimportant sectors, exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister or the Cabinet, who are accountable to Parliament and exclusively so except in matters of the royal family since at least the time of William IV. All right. So now the House of Hanover got their authority unlawfully as a result of the misunderstanding of the citizens realizing what crown they are representing. Because they're not representing the English crown. The English power or the English crown under what they call the royal regalia, the King's Royal Regalia, is always intact. It's always intact. Once again, King and Parliament. King and Parliament, sometimes referred neutrally as Crown and Parliament, is a technical term of constitutional law in the Commonwealth that refers to the Crown and its legislative role, acting with the advice and consent of Parliament, including if the Parliament is bicameral, both the lower house and upper house. Okay, so you got to understand the origin of Parliament, going to the Parliament of England, to the Created Regis, to Wittemont. Not talking about Scotland's Parliament or Ireland's Parliament. We're talking about English Parliament because it's governed by English law, i.e., English common law. Why? Because that's the law that still supersedes today. How we know that? Let's qualify it. Hopefully, I won't forget nothing today. Smith versus Alabama, 1888 case. There is, however, one clear exception to the statement that there is no national common law. The interpretation of the Constitution of the United States is necessarily influenced by the fact that its provisions are framed in the language of the English common law and are to be read in light of its history. The codes of constitutional and statutory construction, we're talking about statutory uh, codes at large, as well as the United States Code. The Code of Constitutional and Statutory Construction, which therefore is gradually formed by the judgment of this court and the application of Constitution and the laws and treaties made in pursuance thereof, have for its basis so much of the common law as may be implied in the subject, and the constitutes a common law resting on national authority. Did you hear that? Resting on national authority. So the national authority of the United States is based off the law of the common law of England, which all the states within the Union adopted, as we see. All right? As we see. So let's deal with the King's prerogative. We go to United States Fidelity Company versus Carter. Y'all pull that up. This is 1933, September 20, 1933. President Campbell's Chief Justice, Holtz, Epps, Huggins, Gregory, and Browning. All right. This is the United States Supreme Court in 1933. One, state, preference, common law, prerogatives of the king, i.e., royal prerogatives. Royal prerogatives. All right. Talking about legislative council here in the United States, and they're talking about royal prerogatives, not the issues dealing with a council. of the United States, which they consist of. They recognize what they've done wrong, but they recognize the power which they usurped, which was surrendered to them by the colonies under the Articles of Confederation, i.e., royal comprised of the Legislative Council of King and Parliament. Because at that time it was Queen. And it doesn't go by matrilineal, it's patrilineal. All right? State preference common law, prerogatives of the king. From a very early time, the common law of England, and so it specifically said king. From very early times, the common law of England gave or rather recognized, all right? So the colonists said in the Articles of Confederation that the laws that they surrender as recognized by the colonies belong to the king and parliament. And here we talking about the laws recognized in the United States judiciary in regards to the royal prerogatives dealing with the legislative council as recognized in the days of the kings of parliament. All right? From a very early time of the common law of England gave, or rather recognized, the king's assertion of right by prerogatives to have a debt due to him by one of his subjects paid in preference to a debt due by his debtor to one of his subjects. This right existed regardless of the solvency or insolvency of the king's debtor. It was not limited to the collection of taxes, duties, and other public revenues. This speaks to the king's exchequer chamber. All right. 2. Preference, common law prerogative of the king, existence of time, common law adopted by Virginia. So you're talking about the colony of Virginia, which is one of the original 13 colonies of the 13 colonies. As the king's prerogative right of preference, there can be no question that both in the 4th year of the reign of James I, a Scottish king, and also at the time of the American Revolution, the king was entitled by prerogative under the common law of England to have the payment of debt, public or private, due him preferred to the payment of a debt due by his debtor to any of his subjects, regardless of the solvency or insolvency of his debtor. So we're talking about the Articles of Confederation. Our debts are obligated by the United States Constitution as conferred under the Articles of Confederation concerning that which was in power prior to the creation of that Constitution, which is in question. Y'all don't hear me. 3. State preference, power of states to provide the preference for the debt. There can be no doubt that Virginia has adopted the principle of the common law of England. This is what Smith versus Alabama was talking about, that the sovereign power of the state has the power and authority to provide, if it deems proper, that all debts due to the government, i.e. to the state, shall be paid by its debtors in preference to the debt due to a private person or a corporation. The power to so provide is an instance of sovereignty, and the Commonwealth of Virginia unquestionably succeeded to it when she separated from England and became a sovereign state. You hear that? Because they gave away the king's authority, i.e. the king's royal prerogative, which is in question in this day and time. The only thing missing was the king. 4. State preference, common law prerogative of the king. The common law relating to the prerogative rights of the king to have the payment of his debts preferred have not been lifted up bodily and incorporated into law of Virginia without any modification other than to substitute the Commonwealth for the king or crown. If they have been adopted to any extent, it is after they have been much pared down and restricted in their application. 5. Common law adopts Virginia, how far common law incorporated in the law of Virginia. The ordinance of 1776 and the Virginia statute adopted the common law of England are not to be construed as having incorporated into our law without modification. The whole body of the common law of England, except such part of it as are strictly speaking repugnant to the Virginia Bill of Rights or Constitution, or as having made all parts thereof, which are adopted applicable in Virginia to the same extent or in the same manner in all respect as it was applied by the English presidents. All right, one more. 6. Common law adopted under Virginia. How far the common law incorporated into the laws of Virginia. Such of the common law of England doctrines and the principles as are repugnant to the nature and character of our political system, of which the difference in various circumstances of our country render inapplicable to us, are either not enforced here or must be so modified in the application as to adapt them to our condition. All right. So this is due the creation of what they call laws created by Congress through the amending of the legislation, which as is presumed by way of what they call the Law Commission revision. The law commission revision is those who go through and revise the constitutional legislation that was derived from the Constitution in regards to the amending to create what they call statutes or laws or what they call codes of law. All right? Everybody needs to understand that. Let's read one more. 7. Adoption in Virginia. How far common law incorporated the laws of Virginia preface of King's debt. The rule of the common law of England relating to the king's prerogative rights to have his debt preferred are not to be taken to have been adopted by Virginia as applicable to a debt which has arisen from the Commonwealth having engaged in some commercial or business transaction with private persons or corporations. As for instance, the deposit of his money in banks, the insurance of property in an ordinary fire insurance company, or any contract for the construction of roads. In such cases, the state has descended to the level of the citizen and is to be deemed, in the absence of statutory provisions to the contrary, to have elected to take potluck with a citizen. You hear that? Y'all better listen to what's going on. This brings you to what we call Chisholm versus Georgia, another United States court case by the United States Judiciary. This is from Chief Justice Marshall, Chief Justice Mansfield. I think this is it. No, this is not. Okay, here we go. This is in Chisholm versus Georgia. We already talked about this case. Let me one more coffee up again. Everybody pull that up. Chisholm versus Georgia. All right. Chisholm versus Georgia, 1793. All right. 1793. In the old, though this is Chief Justice Mansfield. All right. This is the same Chief Justice from the King's Bench who ruled in Somerset versus Stewart. All right. That said that all people of darker complexion, when they step foot in England, they're free. Contrary to the status of Dred Scott and Dred Scott versus Sanford, read by Chief Justice Cheney, because there's a case ruled on in Chief Justice Cheney. I think I got that here. I think I have it. If we come across it, I'll read it to you. But Chief Justice Cheney made the decision in regards to the status of Dred Scott, in regards to him being considered as a citizen. All right. Now we understand that in this case, uh, this decision is being rendered by Chief Justice Mansfield in regards to um, uh, about the authority under the royal prerogatives of the king in regards to uh, king in parliament or just the king itself. All right, in reference to the difference between corporations. All right, between the crown and the authority the crown gives to make corporations. All right, it's the king that gives life to him. This is recognized in England and is recognized in the United States. And we know the United States is nothing but the colonies consisting of the states that surrendered that power of the king and parliament to what we call the United States, and which is a crime itself. It's a treason act. It's a felony, as well as it's a breach of the king's peace. All right, let's continue. In old authorities, there does not appear any distinction between debt that might be contradicted personally by the king or his own private use, and such has contracted in his political capacity for the service of his kingdom. So we're talking about that so again, as we just read, and what was that case? United States Fidelity Company versus in regards to the king's royal prerogative. All right. As he had, however, then fixed an independent revenues upon which depended on the ordinary support of government as well as the expenditures for his own private occasions. Probably not material distinction at that time existed or could easily be made. A very important distinction may, however, perhaps now subsist between the two cases for the reason intimated by Lord Mansfield. Since the whole support of the government depends now on parliamentary provisions, and except in the case of civil lists, thus for most particular annuals. Thus, it appears that in England, even in the case of private debt contracted by the king in his own person, there is no remedy but by petition, which must receive his express sanction. Otherwise, there can be no proceeding upon it. King can't be sued in his own court. If the debt contracted by avowedly for the public use of government, it is least doubtful whether the remedy will lie, and if it will, it remain afterward in the power of Parliament to provide for it or not among the current supplies of the year. All right, let me move a little further. Yeah, I can see that. Now there, now there are, in my opinion, the most essential differences between the old cases of corporations, to which the law intimated had reference, and the great and extraordinary case of states separately possessing as to everything simply relating to themselves. the fullest powers of sovereignty, and yet in some other defined particulars, subject to a superior power composed out of themselves for the common welfare of the whole. The only law concerning corporations to which I can see the least reference is to be had in the common law of England on that subject. I need not repeat the observations I made in respect to the operations of that law in this country. The word corporations, in the largest sense, has a more extensive meaning than people generally are aware of. Any body politics, sole or aggregate. Once again, any body politics, sole or aggregate, whether it's the power be restricted or transcendent, is in a sense a corporation. Sorry about that. Right here. Whether its power be restricted or transcendent, it is in a sense a corporation. The king, accordingly, in England, it's called a corporation, i.e., a corporation sole, represented by the crown. All right. So the crown being corporation sole is personified by the monarch by way of body of politics or person through personification or corporation or what we call in, incorporation, personification, or incarnation, however you want to look at it. The king accordingly in England is called a corporation. Also by a very respectable author is the parliament itself. Did you hear that? Is the parliament itself. In this extensive sense, not only each state singly, but even the United States may without impropriety be termed corporations. You hear that? So the United States, as corporations, have usurped the power as a result of them being aggregate of the corporation sole, i.e., being the crown. Because under the Articles of the Confederation, all the powers belonging to the crown under the king and parliament was surrendered unlawfully. So it says king is parliament. So they really didn't take anything. They took out the king. All right? They took out the king or what we call the office of the king, or what we call the corporation sole, by way of separating the king's parliament, which is the fusion of power of the executive and legislative branch. All right? In this extensive sense, not only each state singly, but every state may without impropriety be termed corporation. I have therefore, in contradiction to the large and indefinite term, used the term subordinate corporation. Meaning to refer to such only as alone capable of the slightest application for the purpose of the objection, whose creation and whose powers are limited by law, by statute, by ordinance, by code. The difference between such corporations and the several states in the Union as relative to the general weak central government are very obvious in the following particulars. One, a corporation is the mere creature of the king or of parliament, very rarely of the latter, most usually of the former itself. Why? Because according to Chisholm versus Georgia, king is parliament itself. Those are not my words. That's the Supreme Court. It owes its existence, its name, its laws. You hear that? To the authority which creates it. A state does not owe its own origin to the government of the United States in the highest or in any of its branches. It was in existence before it. It derives its authority from the same pure and sacred source as itself, the voluntary and deliberate choice of the people. Corporations can do no act but what is subject to the revision either of a court of justice or some other authority within the government, i.e., your council. Not your legislative council, because the king will be involved in regards to the laws that protect its subject, which was surrendered to the United States as the sovereign, being the central government, but the states still maintaining their sovereignty pursuant to Article 6, because they knew the king was going to come back because the power surrendered to the United States government under the Article of Confederation was the royal prerogative of the king, which is recognized in the 1933 case in the United States. All right, let's move forward. This was ruled by James Chief Justice Mansfield. Chief Justice James Mansfield also ruled in Somerset versus Stewart. All right. You should have this man on your team. The judgment in regards to Somerset versus Stewart. After hearing oral arguments, Lord Mansfield proposed that Stewart could avoid the potentially far-reaching effects on slave owners' profit if he were to allow Somerset to go free and not to insist on the court issuing a final judgment. Otherwise, Mansfield said that would give judgment and let justice be done, whatever the consequence. Mr. Stewart advanced no claim on contract. He rests his whole demand on the right to the Negroes as a slave, and mentions the purpose of the detainers, i.e., what we call bill of attainder, to be the sending of him over to be sold in Jamaica. If parties will have judgment, fiat justia, ruat caelum, let justice be done, whatever be the consequence. 50, whatever that term is, a head may not be a high price, then a loss follows to the proprietors of the above 7,000 sterlings. How would the law stand with respect to their settlement, their wages? How many actions for any slight coercion by the master? We cannot in any of these points direct the law. The law must rule us. In these particulars, it may be a matter of weighty consideration what provisions are made or set by the law. Mr. Stewart may end the question by discharging or giving freedom to the Negro. All right, giving freedom to the Negro by discharging him. That's the first here. Lord Mansfield decided slavery only exists by positive law, and positive law is contrast to natural law. All right, natural law is law created by councils. All right, natural law is law created by councils, not the law created by legislative council for the nation. All right, for the nation, country, state, or province. The state of slavery is of such a nature that is incapable of being introduction on any reason, moral or political, but only by a positive law. which preserves its force long after the reason, occasion, and time itself from whence it was created, is erased from memory. It is so odious that nothing can be suffered to support it but positive law. Whatever inconveniences therefore may follow from the decision, I cannot say this case is allowed or approved by the laws of England, and therefore blacks must be discharged. Okay? Blacks must be discharged. This is Lord Manfield. Another case Lord Manfield ruled on. Campbell versus Hall. He's a member of the King's Bench, y'all. Members of the King's Bench. Campbell versus Hall. No question was ever started before, but that the king has a right to the legislative authority over a conquered country. This appeal requires your lordship to determine the limits of that power, i.e., the royal prerogatives we're talking about. All right, which was surrendered to the United States under the Articles of Confederation. He resumed later, although the passage from the judgment of Longfield has regularly been cited for the proposition that the king cannot legislate contrary to the fundamental principles of that kind. I suspend that this is to be read too much into his remarks. The passage may be more readily understood if the punctuation is modernized in this way. The sixth and the last proposition is that if the king, and when I say king, I always mean the king, without the concurrence of parliament, has a power to alter the old and to introduce new laws in a conquered country. This legislation being subordinate, that is subordinate to his own authority in parliament, he cannot make any new changes contrary to the fundamental principle. He cannot exempt an inhabitant from the particular dominion, as for instance, from the laws of trade or from the powers of parliament, or give him privileges exclusive of his own subjects, and so in many or instances which might be put. Which brings us right back here to United States Fidelity versus Carter. That gave you 7 points on the prerogatives of the king. All right? 7 points. All in regards to subjects acquiring relief in regards to debts. Debt, because we were all assumed to be debtors. All right? That's under what we call the law of assumptions, the law of what we call trespass. They're assuming we are trespassing on this land. All right? As English subjects, you're not trespassing. They are trespassing. Why? Because they're a foreign state. All right, let's qualify it. Martin versus Waddell, United States Supreme Court. Public trust doctrine. Or cess to create talk. Whatever you want to identify by, this is what we're talking about. Also look up, what was it? Their association. I forgot that other case. But you can also look up Johnson versus McIntosh. All right. The land under the navigational waters within the limits of the charter passed to the grantees as one of the royalties, all right, royal prerogatives, incidents to the power of government, and were to be held by him in the same manner and for the same purpose that the navigational waters of England and the soils under them are held by the crown. You hear that? Did y'all hear that? We're talking about land, the legislative council, under royal prerogatives which arise from the crown. The policy of England since the Magna Carta for the last 600 years has been carefully preserved to secure the common right of piscary for the benefit of the public. It required plain language in a letter patent from Duke of York to persuade this court in the 18th century that the public and common right of fishing and navigational waters, which has been so long and so carefully guarded in England, which was preserved in every other colony founded on the Atlantic border, was intended in this one instance to be taken away. There is nothing in this charter that requires this conclusion. The surrender by the provinces to Queen Anne in 1702 was of all powers, authorities, and privileges of concern to the government of the province, and the right in dispute in this case was one of these privileges. No words are used for the purpose of withholding from the crown any of its ordinary and well-known prerogatives. The surrender, according to its evident object and meaning, restored them to the same flight and condition in which they originally came to the hands of the Duke of York when the people of New Jersey took possession of the reins of the government and took into their own hands the power of the sovereignty, the prerogatives and regalities which before belonged either to the crown or the parliament became immediately rightfully invested in the state. Who y'all don't see the weight or the power that y'all have as English. Hold on. Okay. Martin versus Wardell. Martin versus Wardell. Powerful case right there. In reference to territory jurisdiction of the crown. And every other territory is governed by the crown under what we call the Commonwealth, under the king's jury gallery, under the radical title that he had. All right. United States only have a sovereign by way of prescription, a non-possessory right to the prerogative rights of the crown. All right. Let's just go back to the council before we move forward. You know, the legislative council originates under the English kingdoms, falls under the royal prerogatives, which we just discussed, contrast to those of the United States that originate from the councils, right here. All right, totally different. So let's go to council. Excuse me. Okay, move forward. I'm caught up. So we already discussed United States Secretary of State, which is officer of the executive cabinet under the headed by the president, which is first in command, chief of command. All right. The first holder of that office was Thomas Jefferson. All right. It was Thomas Jefferson. Anthony Blinken holds that office, and he's the head of what we call the United States Department of State. All right. The United States Department of States. And that department deals with all issues in regards to foreign affairs, whether dealing with war, treaties, alliances, setting up consuls, etc. That's the go-to guy. All right. He's governed under the United States Code. All right. Constituting instruments. He appoints to the president. All right. His office is not even in the what we call the White House. We know Congress is in the Capitol. His office is not even in the White House. His office is the United States Department of State, down the street from the White House. All right. He's precursor Secretary of Foreign Affairs. The first holder is Thomas Jefferson. All right, which I discussed in uh, my last two videos. If it wasn't in Martin versus Wardell Public Trust Doctrine, it was in the English Church. Somewhere in there, I discussed that. All right. So we see Anthony Blinken is United States Department of State of the Executive Department. All right. His 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 constituent instrument or the authority which arises comes under Title 22 United States Code 2651. All right. 2651. Okay. The president. That office uh, Secretary of State also goes back to the original creation under Articles of Confederation, or the Department, United States Department of State goes back to the Articles of Confederation. All right, your president, which is currently Joe Biden. He's head of the executive department. Constituent instrument, Constitution of the United States, Article 2. Article 2. Constituent instrument is Article 2. All right, not Article 1, not Article 3, but Article 2 is constituent instrument that governs him and any member of his cabinet, and that includes Anthony Blinken. All right? That includes Anthony Blinken, head of the United States Department of State, that deals with foreign issues. That even includes with declaring war. All right? And you see what's going on. Contradictory to what Articles of Confederation actually said. All right. So the first office of that office was who? George Washington. Is it in here? Yeah. First holder, George Washington. All right. First holder president. First holder of Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. All right. Let's go to the vice president. Vice president, Pamela Harris. Constituent instrument, the Constitution, March 4th, 1789. First holder, John Adams. All right. First holder, John Adams. She now holds the office that John Adams had. Just going back all the way to the Articles of Confederation of March 4th, 1781, if I'm mistaken. I know it's 1781, the date I'm a little unsure. I think it was March 1st or May 1st, one of them. All right. All right. Now we know there's a separation of power. All right. There's a separation of power. We know the president's position, right? We know his possession. He's chief of office, right? Has nothing to do with the legislative branch. Why? Because there's a separation of power. When the power was fused, it was under the king and parliament, which had a say so with the legislative branch because it was called king and parliament. All right. But there is a separation of church and state. So separation of power. So the president or anybody in his cabinet cannot influence the legislative branch. And the legislative branch can compose of Congress, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives. And our kingdom, or in our government, it's called the House of Lords and the House of Commons. All right? Very important to understand that. But it says here, let me highlight it. The vice president, also an officer of the legislative branch, as presiding of the Senate and the capacity, the vice president is empowered to preside over Senate deliberations at any time, but may not vote except to cast a tie-breaking vote. Let me repeat that. The vice president is also an officer of the legislative branch as the president of the Senate. You hear that? She's the president of the upper house of the legislature, i.e., Congress. You in one house, president of another house. In this capacity, the vice president is empowered to preside over the Senate. All right? She's right after the president, and he's in charge of the executive department as prescribed by their constitution of 1789. That contradicts the Constitution of the Articles of Confederation, where it says that all judges, all senators, all representatives, all anybody in that capacity are subject, except that president. Why? Because he's head of state. He's head of state. What they call it? Coup d'etat. Y'all better realize what's going on. So Pamela Harris presides over the Senate, the upper house. All right? The executive departments have authority over the upper house of the legislature. Right? So if she has authority over the upper house and she works for the executive branch, guess who has power over the lower house, i.e., the House of Representatives? The same house. The same house. Who is the speaker for that? Mike Johnson. He just got voted in because really the House of Representatives speaks for the majority. So he has more say so as a result of the contrast or the foreseeable misunderstanding that people will now understand what's going on because the Senate should have the most power. That's the upper house. It's that way for a problem because it represents king and parliament. All right? It represents king and parliament, not the House of Commons. Everybody understand what's going on? Let's go to Speaker of the United States, Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson, incumbent October 25th, 2023. Status: presiding officer. Constitution of the United States, Instrument, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. What's the problem with this? The Speaker is from the government under Article 1 of the Constitution under the legislator, right? As the Speaker of the House, he speaks for both houses. The Senate in the House of in the House of Representatives, because he controls the House of Representatives, and the Vice President controls the Senate, who's second in command to the President from the second House, which is the House of the Executive Branch, not the first House. But here we have contradictory of the tenure in regards to Mike Johnson being from government under the instrument under Article 1, but yet controls the House of Representatives, which is subject to the authority of an executive figure. Pamela Harris. There's a problem with that. That's totally contradictory to the Constitution of the Articles of Confederation. Because under Article 6, the contracts and debts that are agreed upon as the supreme law of land based off those prior treaties, all right, those prior treaties, and we can go back for days and talk about that, are still in effect to the parties that were the mediums who made those contracts, those agreements, those alliances, etc. All right. In this case, we're speaking about the Articles of Confederation and those who made the alliances. The alliances made in the Articles of Confederation was with themselves, nobody else but with themselves, because they were subject to the government of the crown at that time. Let's move forward. Okay. Okay. Let's go back to the focal point. Legislative Council. The Legislative Council and the origin of the Legislative Council under the English common law originated from the monarch's royal regalia, royal prerogatives, which we have qualified in present day United States case law by the United States Supreme Court versus that council that existed from the creation of the United States at that time when they were called colonies, which was called a council, which act as if they're a legit legislator, in which they're not, because I just proved they're not. All right? And they're running the whole government from the executive seat, which is unconstitutional as a result of the people now recognizing that they have removed their king. That, as we've seen in Standard Oil Company, represented by Attorney General Parson against the Standard Oil Company, it shows you that when there is no heirs by way of interstate, then all property is streets to the king or the crown, because the king personifies the crown. If it is under the watch or the undertaking of the United States, then it's considered what they call vacant property. abandoned property, bona vacatina, abandoned property, and it remains under the crown because the crown still rules here. I've proven that from over and over and over and over. Hold on for 1 second. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Jasmine from Perpetual.
Yes.
So I had to pick her a guide to their 2028. I mean 2008 BMW. So I just want to check if everything is ready for be pick up.
For what?
Be pick up. The car is at 2008 BMW.
Yes, it's been picked up. I text them back.
Okay, somebody paying everything?
Somebody paid. He didn't ask for anything.
Okay, thank you so much. So
All
my
right.
job is gonna be there like 1 hour or something.
I didn't ask for no other tow truck.
He said 1 hour and something.
He already came.
Somebody pick up the car already?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Sorry about that. Oh boy. Let's go. All right. So we're talking about I don't know why my phone we cut this off. Okay. So the legislative council, as we can see, based off the history, according to the origin of the common law, was subject to what we call the king in parliament, ruled by the king's royal prerogative. As we had case law to qualify that the king is actually parliament itself. All right. He appoints his council. All right. That's what we call the calling of parliament. All right. But we see in the United States, they're not acting off the laws of parliamentary. They enacted their own parliamentary procedures based off what they call home rule. All right. Home rule. So it says United States Legislative Council has a different connotation. It means council with the legislative, with a supervised non-partisan support staff. All right. So being that they call council, we have to be able to distinguish the council calling themselves a legislative council because all this was created by way of acts of that Congress. That Congress, they passed laws themselves to enact laws that become assume de jure legislation, which they are not, once under the scope of review. All right, under the scope of review, it's assumed until proven otherwise. All right, because you got the old case law, which applies to the laws of our forefathers. Then you got case law that denotes to the laws of the government that was under the Articles of Confederation, and then you got case law that arrived from those deriving from the present United States of America to these modern days now. Okay, we must understand that. So when we're dealing with royal prerogatives, we're not talking about the royal prerogatives that exist in our forefathers' day, which are still here, as we've seen in United States. What was the case? United States Fidelity Company versus Carter. That was in 1933, and they're still talking about the king prerogative. But right now, the king prerogative of the legislative council of their king's parliament, which was surrendered by the 13 colonies to the Articles of Confederation, was the new government under the Second Continental Congress, which became the United States government. The powers that they inherited was the power that was rightfully belonging to the king and parliament that the colonies recognized. All right. So as a result, they amended it and created what they call statutes at large and what they call codes of law. All right. That takes us to United States codes. At the Office of Law Review Commission. These are the editors of the United States Code. All right. And the law of the United States, the codes of laws of the United States of America, variously abbreviated to codes of the law of the United States Code, U.S. Code, or U.S.C. or USC, is the official compilation of the codification of the general and permanent federal statutes to the Federal Register. It contains 53 titles, 53 titles. It contains 53 titles. The main edition is published every 6 years by the Office of Law Review Council of the House of Representatives and cumulates supplements are published annually. The office versions of these laws appear in the United States statutes at large, a chronological and uncodified compilation. So the United States codes, which are also confined in the United States statutes at large, are codified by way of what we call the Office of Law Revision Council under the authority of the House of Representatives. All right? And the House of Representatives are overseen by Mike Johnson. And Mike Johnson is third in command to the president of the executive branch. He's third in command to the executive branch. And he's in charge of the Office of Law Revision Council, which is in charge of altering, changing, modifying statutes. All right? And that must be overseen by the United States Judicial Commissioner. All right? Office of Law. The Office of Law Revision Council of the United States House of Representatives prepares and publishes the United States Code, which is the consolidation of codification by subject matter of the general and permanent laws of the United States. The office was created in 1974 with the provisions of Title II. All right? Of Title II, which we'll go through in a second. Appointments and duties. The council is appointed by the Speaker of the House. You hear that? Which is Mike Johnson. So if any codes of laws are going into effect, they're overseen by the Speaker of the House, which is Mike Johnson, right? And all those codes that are created that are published in the United States Code or the statutes at large, overseen by the Speaker of the House from the House of Representatives, must be submitted to what we call the Committee on the Judiciary, right? And the Committee of Judiciary is of the which we'll go to in a second. The council is appointed by the Speaker of the House and must prepare and submit to the Committee of Judiciary one title at a time and complete compilation, restatements, and revisions of the general permanent laws of the United States, which conform to the understood policy, intent, and purpose of Congress and the original enactment, with such an amendments, corrections as will remove ambiguity, contradiction, and a history, what's it called, anoristic, if I'm saying the name right, and a neuristic, if I'm saying it right, I think so, and other imperfections, both of substance and of form, separately stated with a view to an enactment of each title as positive law. As positive law. Did y'all hear that? We already talked about positive law contrast to natural law. And Somerset versus Stewart. Slavery only exists by positive law. Now they're creating positive law known as United States codes or statutes at large, overseen by the Speaker of the House, which is Mike Johnson, right? Which creates laws by the Law Review Council, which is committed to what we call the Committee of Judiciary. All right, the Committee of Judiciary. Let's check them out then. The United States House Committee on the Judiciary, also called House Judiciary Committee, is the standing committee. Once again, councils are committees. Right here, a committee might also be denoted as a council, though a committee is generally a subordinate body composed of members of larger bodies, while a council may not be. All right, because we know the council is acting as the government. When you go back to the legislative council, in the United States, a legislative council has different connotation. It means a council within the legislature with supervised nonpartisan support staff. All right? They don't have any royal prerogatives. Why? And they can't use them. Right? Because they remain attached to the crown. All right? They remain attached to the crown. House Committee on Judiciary. I know y'all gotta be loving this one. It is in charge with overseeing the administrative justice within the federal courts, federal administrative agencies, and federal law enforcement entities. See how far we screwed? Lacking this understanding what I'm bringing to you. You screwed from the door. The Judiciary Committee is often involved in the impeachment process against federal officials because of the legal nature of its oversight. And committee members usually have a legal background, but this is not required. Did you hear that? It's not required. What happened to Article 3? Article 3 is now Article 2, and Article 2 is now Article 1. What happened to the distinction, y'all? Let's see. The committee was created on June 3rd, 1830. Right? By a committee. Had nothing to do with Article 3 under the Judiciary Act of 1789. Nothing to do with that. Why? Because you have no true legislative authority, no legislative council here. Just committee or corporation acting as a board or a council. All right? If you're not convinced there by what's been presented to you by I, your king, it's truly a sad day. Because the Law Review Commission under the House of Representatives, under the Speaker of the House, which could submit them to the Judiciary Committee of the United States, is no different than the Law Revision Commission of the state of New Jersey, which is trying to assume the same thing that they're doing under their role of government. We already talked about this. State of New Jersey Law Revision Commission. They're trying to dole out Title 46 was this was the law governing the private property that belongs to us, right? The English people that was surrendered by the Board of Proprietors back to the Crown. Right here. This is crazy. Make sure you see this. Many are clearly anarchistic. The laws governing the Title 46 in its chapters. They cover matters no longer relevant. For example, Chapter 3 conserves surveys by the Board of Proprietors, the original owners of the colonial New Jersey. Other adjacent chapters are recent and standalone and have not been made part of this revision. For example, Chapter 3B, New Home Warranty and Builders Registration Act. All right, those all deal with encumbrances. All right, as a result of what we call the power of domain under the police powers of the state. All right, that allows what we call possessory rights, known as easements. Understanding property law. All right, so let's bring more clarity before I come to our close. The United States Code, since we know where they originate, from the United States House of Representatives. Let's look what they say about our government under the codes. Title 2, the Congress, Chapter 9, Office of Legislative Council. We know a legislative council is not the same as a council. And we know the legislative council origin goes back to the royal prerogatives versus what the United States practices, which is that of a council with laws created by a committee. And as they said, the House of Representatives under Mike Johnson is responsible for the codes that we are reading now, which are presented to the Judiciary Committee of the United States, which is a committee that is a part of the council, which consists of those who represent our Congress, consisting of what we call the Senate and the House of Representatives. All right? All governed under the United States Code, Section 271. Establishment. There should be a Senate and officer to be known as the office of the Legislative Council and to be under the direction of the Legislative Council of the Senate. Once again, they're not talking about the true Legislative Council. They're talking about the council and committee because the committee has nothing to do with that which was created by the Constitution. The Constitution is not codes, and the codes is not the Constitution. The Constitution says what they say, because that is the authoritative instrument under Article 6, which has the set the parameters under the Articles of Confederation that denotes two colonies, which were under the authority of the crown, which involved king and parliament, known as king and parliament, known as what we call royal prerogatives. So there should be a Senate and an office to be known as the office of the Legislative Council and to be under the direction of the Legislative Council of the Senate. Editorial notes. As originally enacted, section provided for the creation of the office of the creation, y'all hear that? Of an office of the Legislative Council to be under the direction of the two legislative councils. In view of the non-applicability of section to the Speaker of the House, i.e. Mike Epson, employees, etc., of the House of Representatives pursuant to Section 531 of Public Law 91-510, set out as noted under Section 281 of this title that deals with the House of Representatives, section has been revised to limit applicability to the Senate and creation therein of the office of the Legislative Council. See Section 281 of the title for provision established under the office of Legislative Council for the House of Representatives and Section 282 of the title for the provision vested management, etc., in the Legislative Council. All right. 272. The Legislative Council. Section 272 of Title II of the United States Code. The Legislative Council should be appointed by the President pro tempore of the Senate without reference to political affiliation and solely on the grounds of fitness to perform duties of the office. All right? And we know that that office, the Senate, is overseen by the Vice President, Pamela Harris, because she's the appointer. All right? She's the appointer. Section 272. Congress, the Office of the Legislative Council, Subchapter 2, House of Representatives, Purpose, Policy, Functions, and Establishment. Establishment. There is established in the House of Representatives a office to be known as the Office of the Legislative Council, referred to hereafter as this subchapter as the office. All right, as the office. As you can see, together, the Congress, Chapter 9, Office of Legislative Council, consisted of sections 271 to 277 and 281 to 282, consisted of the Senate and House of Representatives, all under the authority of your president, your vice president, and your secretary and your Speaker of the House. All right, which is second, which is third in line, because the Vice President Kamala Harris is second in line to the presidency under the authority of the executive branch, which is totally separate branch of the government. They're not fused like it was under the royal prerogatives under the king in parliament, under the royal prerogatives of the king, who represents parliament. Parliament just carry out his wishes for the best of the public trust. All right? Title 1, General Codes of Law, General Provisions, Chapter 3, Codes of Law of the United States, Supplement, District of Columbia Code Supplement, Publication and Distribution of the Codes of Law for the United States Supplement of District of Columbia Codes and Supplement. Talking about statutes at large of the United States codes, once appointed, once the committee are appointed by the House, for the Senate will be by the Vice President, and for the House Speaker would be by the for the House Representative would be by the Speaker of the House. All laws created to be coded into statutory law are submitted to the Committee on the Judiciary that was under the authority of what we call the House of Representatives. All right, all overseen by the Speaker of the House and the Vice President, right, which is second to command to the President, which is under the authority of Article 2 and not Article 1, which sets the standard for the legislator, which is only missing the king, representing kingdom in parliament, but you won't know that by not understanding the authority under Article 6 of the United States Constitution based off the debt, contracts, agreements made under laws and treaties made as the Articles of Confederation as the colonies, which are in or still in play today. All right? They're still in play today. All right? The only thing was missing is your king. And I am back. I want to make sure I covered everything. Under the Articles of Confederation, as it said, the Articles consciously establish a weak central government, affording it only those powers the former colonies have recognized as belonging to the king and parliament. King and parliament rules under royal prerogative. King and parliament. That authority lies in the crown, because it refers to the crown, and it refers to what we call a fusion of power of the executive branch and the legislative branch. All right? The executive branch and the legislative branch. All right? And that represents the king's Prerogative power. The king's royal prerogative powers, which we know are still recognized here in the United States, as established here in the United States Fidelity Company versus Carter. Supreme Court of Virginia. Actually, this is the state Supreme Court, not United States Supreme Court. A state Supreme Court. All right. In 1933. Right there. Prerogatives of the king. All right. So I think I covered everything. Yeah, I think I did. So there you have it. I hope y'all like the content. It's my duty to inform you of what's going on because, as you can see, in our certificate of corporation, we have incorporated as the corporation, so I the crown, I the English throne. All right, and we know that you know faith is the substance not belief, faith, and fruition is a concept where we thrive off. All the thoughts that come back from time immemorial, we're bringing to fruition. You know what I'm saying? And the fruition is manifesting that thought. You know what I'm saying? From abstract to concrete. You know what I'm saying? We don't want it to remain a spook and wish for spooked remedies. We want concrete. So I gave you concrete. It's there for those who want it. It's those for those who want it. There for those who want to receive it. The only thing left for you is you to take it. And with that, the king, the ancestors, as well as uh, uh, the law which preserves you, says peace.